Hello everyone, welcome to another Unreal Engine video. And today I think we're going to start over on the ability system because I want to make it network replicated. So, welcome if you're new. Welcome if you're rejoining. Thanks for stopping by. Yeah, so we're going to take a look at just building out a system of a network replicated montage system where we can use abilities, things like that. Because basically ability system is built on top of the montages, so to get started, what I did here is I created, so we learned that there was a lot of similarities between what we've done in our data-driven stuff previously to, because we have like tags and we have things like that are all shared. We have names, labels, yeah, stuff like that. So I started off creating a root data for our stuff instead. And this is going to hold your shared variables, something like a label, a description, your regular tags, the gameplay tags associated. And that'll allow us to share things, a lot of these shared functionalities, because I moved over the montage. The ability system has now been like split into an action system that controls a montage that will also control an ability. So the montage is set up the same way, I believe, here, but instead of the other data, we use the root data here, and then we pass it on. We add the montage to it, and then we have the primary data asset interface, and then we have the primary data asset. So the interface has the find and the as, and then this has the database or the map with the strings and data for the montages. I haven't set up any montages yet. I'll do that in a minute, just so we can see. We can just need to set up some of these things. The action system I have now kind of divided up. So I created linking structures, basically, is what I'm going to call them, to the tables instead. So these other, so this root action data now, we'll look at, we're going to say has an animation, and then we have an animation data associated with it. And we'll do that same thing with the ability. So it's kind of like a linking table here for our action. And so these other linking structures is what I'm calling them, are going to link to the other tables using. So let's take a look at the anim one, which is going to do the montage. This is actually going to take in our primary data asset here. So we'll pass it a montage ID, and then we'll give it this database. So this will keep it out of our component. So when we create the component, we only need to reference this one database instead. And then we'll have access to all this information. So instead of needing to put in like one or two primary data assets, maybe three or four, maybe if you make some more complicated systems, you just pass in the one, and then we can use the booleans off of the action data just to check and make it a little quicker. And the action data is the same thing, or the ability system takes an ability ID and then takes the primary data asset and then passes that in. And then the ability system, I'm actually decided to cut down a bit, like really just start shaving it, shaved it down. And so the ability data now here is only gonna have the ability class and the base damage. And I think that's okay. We'll have a linking table where we can use this in our component to pull the animation data. We can pull the ability data. So if we want to, when we run it networked, we'll have the animation, we'll have the ability to spawn. So we really only need to do the RPC calls to handle this animation and the ability. After a bit of work, I created the montage here, the data asset. Added this montage I created off of the landing animation that comes in the base here. Not here, but here. Quinn, Manny. The land here. Created that. So that'll be the montage that we're going to use to test. I created the action data asset as well here over in the action folder. And this is going to be an action. So I named it Spook because it kind of looks like you're spooking someone when you're not jumping. So I'm calling it action spook. And it takes in that ID here. So the idea that we have the montage and then the montage PDA will be set to that DA montage. Actually, I probably should rename these to DA. Well, it is what it is. Now, for this system, I created a simple component. We've got some tags as well that we got set up. So for starting here, we've got 3 tags: ready, interrupt, and in progress. Set that up in the project settings. I created a action user interface that's going to go on our user or player character. It has the as and it has properties, which is going to get a skeletal mesh component. In our component, on our actual component here, we have the as, and then we have a trigger action by ID. So that's the ID that we have in the data asset. Then in the component, when we do this trigger, so when we start up, we want to, is it here? We want to just set up an action user. So we want to set up to make sure that the thing is, or our character has this interface. And then when we want to go ahead and trigger it here, we run this trigger. And this will go into a server command here. Server, run on server, reliable. And we also have a multicast, but this multicast one's just going to be playing the montage. So when we trigger the action, it's going to go into this server call. Then this server call is going to do our validation. So this will make sure that it validates all of our information we're being passed in. And so far, the information that we're only passing in is the action ID. So that's easy. So we're going to start off by taking that action ID. We're going to check to see if this component is ready to fire off another action. If it's ready, we'll go ahead and just query the database, find it. And here we're going to check to see if it has an animation. If it has an animation, great. We'll just break that struct data, and we'll just pass it along through. We'll pass these along when we want to go and find it out of the data asset. But here, this is a macro, and this is just is valid wrapper around this action user. So that'll just make sure it's valid. So the server is validating all of our data. The client will send in our data. The server will validate our data. And then the multicast will update our data. And that's how the architecture basically works for networking. And so, yeah, the valid action data, well, if it's valid, we'll grab the properties, which is a skeletal mesh component. We'll go ahead and just find the montage ID we're looking for inside this montage database. And if it's found, we'll go ahead and multicast it. We'll multicast the montage from the structure. And off the multicast of the montage, what we want to do is we'll want to update our tag to say that we're in progress. So that'll be broadcasted to everything. It'll update this variable. So it'll always be in sync. And that's why you tend to want to do the multicast setting variables on multicast, because it'll be broadcast to all components or all server and clients. So they'll all stay in sync. And then that's when you play the montage. And we'll take the montage and we'll take the skeletal mesh component and we'll play the montage. And on completed, we'll just set the tag to ready. Pretty simple stuff. And then in the character, to set up the character, we added the interface for the action user. So the action user properties will be passed in. It'll grab the skeletal mesh component, which here is this mesh. It has the as for self. And then when we want to actually play something, we can go into the actions here. I have the one key set up. And this is going to just call the action spook. And that's all that's going to do. And take the action component we saved on initialize. When we add it to the our character, we add the component. We set it up as the interface here, as the variable out there here. And then we're just going to call the action spook. And to see that in action, I've got it set up for number of players 2, net mode play as client, so they both should fire up as clients. You can see we're in this client up in the top left. You can run around, you can see, and when I press the 1 key, we spook. Because that's kind of what it looks like when you land. You're like, spook, spook. Okay, let's add some abilities next to this. So we'll have to do some replicated abilities, or at least spawning in the projectile is all replicated. Now, to actually fire an ability off, we're going to need a few things, right? We're going to need the animation montage to have the notify, which will then trigger on our anim graph, right? So we've got this notify, we've got this on the anim graph. We're saying, is the pawn owner an action user? We'll update that, set the action user. And then on our notify, when we create it here, we just simply pull off this interface action user, and we run this new function, notify ability activate. And that will now go over to the player character over here. And we're going to have to do a switch has authority because remember, we ran the montage as a multicast. So we only want to grab the server data because we want to make sure that's where we're actually firing it off from, firing the projectile. And now this action component now has a new function. It's called activate action ability. And this one will go into here in this serve event activate action ability. It will then go to the server call here, run on server reliable. So that's what that's set up to. We'll check our valid user. We'll grab the action data we saved here. Well, actually, I had to add this save in the trigger here. So I actually did do a bit of updating here just to try and trim things down, but I did add a save after this find the action data. But this is only going to be existing on the server side, so we don't have to worry about setting it in our multicasted one here. Yeah, so this trigger montage was just collapsed. The rest of this function was just collapsed into this trigger montage, which does the branch, grabs the anim data from it, and calls the multicast play montage. So that was just slightly updated. I mean, it's just a prototype. We're just working through things here. So on the activate ability, right? We're going to grab the action data we saved from the trigger. We'll query for the ability the same way we did for the montage. And we will then just spawn the actor at the socket location. I did add a socket to this ability data because I figured that we probably need a socket at some point. And I know I did mention that I was trimming this down, but I think it's just going to be more of a add variables as you go type of thing. So yeah, that's just it. Then the server here, the server run on server reliable will run this now. Now that should be it for the component here, but remember now in our ability here, we need a class to spawn. So I went ahead and I created this base projectile here. Let's see, it is in the, I created in this ability folder. Oh, this should be not an eye here. This is not an interface, and neither is this one. What did I do here? So I created these ability actors. And it has just the basic interface here for the ability actor. And then this base ability actor has just a Niagara effect. Now I haven't added the effect database like we had before, but that should be okay. We can add one later. Or maybe do our own. I kind of want to try Niagara. But yeah, so we just have this base ability, but then we have the base ability projectile, which has a static mesh and a projectile movement on it. The class is set to replicate movement, and it's set to replicate in the that's actually set up in the base component, of course, because you want it replicated. And of course, this doesn't do anything, but it just shoots it's just a projectile. So we can see here now. We'll cast it, or we'll play the animation, and we'll fire a projectile. Pew! All right, that's great. Network replicated abilities. Let's go. This material is so weird. It's such a transparent material. You can just see it. Well, I hope you found that helpful. Thanks for watching. We're going to build off of this later, I feel. Like this is going to be a good one. Well, thanks for watching, guys. Have a good one.